Welcome everybody to the third Thursday's webinar with Faces and Voices of Recovery. It's just before our start time. I'm going to give it another moment while we wait for others to join us. So you'll be just hang tight and we'll get started in a moment. Good afternoon and welcome everyone to Third Thursdays with Faces and Voices of Recovery. My name is Patty McCarthy Metcalf, and I'm the Executive Director of Faces and Voices of Recovery. And I want to welcome you to our webinar today on the social model of recovery in recovery housing. This is a very important topic to us as we look to support people in all pathways to recovery across our nation who are seeking support from recovery from alcohol and drug addiction. So we're really thrilled to have our presenters with us today. They are some of the nation's leaders in this area, in this subject area, and are going to be spending this hour today with us, conducting a presentation, and then we're going to open it up for question and answer. So just to give you a little bit of an orientation, you'll see some notes on the left-hand side of the room that this webinar is being recorded, and it will be archived on the Faces and Voices of Recovery website. You can also type in your questions in the Q&A box on the bottom right. That will go to the presenters, and they will answer them at towards the end of our presentation today. And you can also chat with one another, as you see. Laszlo has entered the chat box, and you can say hello there. The web links on the bottom left side of the screen, you'll see are a number of resources we'd like to make available to you, so just to refer to or to let you know about. And a reminder that at the end of today's session, there will be a feedback survey that comes up on your screen when we close out the session. It will ask you for some questions, for your responses to questions about today's webinar, which we always encourage folks to do, so it can help us to look at our future webinars and how we conduct them and the topics that we present. So I want to say again, thank you for being here. And first I would like to, and I'm going to turn it over to Laurie Chris. And Laurie is the Associate Director of the Ohio Council of Behavioral Health and Family Service Providers, which is a nonprofit representing nonprofit addiction treatment and prevention, mental health, and family service providers in Ohio. She's also a board member for the National Alliance for Recovery Residences, NAR. And if you want to find out more about NAR, you can go to NAR online, and lots of great information there about the work that's being done around the country around standards for recovery housing. So now I'd like to turn it over to Laurie.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very
Laurie.
much for the welcome and the opportunity to be here today and spend some time with all of you. I'm looking forward to sharing some information and then having some question and answer opportunities as well. As Patty said, I am with both the Ohio Council and NAR, and if you notice on the first screen here, where I'm also with Ohio Recovery Housing and the principal advisor to that work. And Ohio Recovery Housing is the Ohio affiliate for the National Alliance for Recovery Residences. So we're proud to serve in that role, providing an opportunity for recovery housing operators in Ohio to demonstrate that they meet the quality standards established by NAR. The conversation that we'll have today is based a lot on the work that we're doing here in Ohio, because both Aaron and I are from Ohio, but it will reflect the national work that's being done by NAR, particularly as we talk about the social model of recovery. and how that is demonstrated within recovery residences. Before coming to the Ohio Council, operated recovery residences for 18 years, and my focus was on working with homeless women and their children. And we had the capacity for about 150 families to be living in our recovery residences during that time. So that's part of my experience as well. So I'll turn it over to Erin now and let her introduce herself a little bit more, and then we'll get started.
Thank you, Laurie, and we're excited to be able to present here for Faces and Voices. My name is Erin Helms, and I am an executive board member for Ohio Recovery Housing and an owner-operator of recovery housing for women in Lakewood, Ohio, a suburb of Cleveland, and have been doing this for the past several years, and previous to that, worked primarily in inpatient and outpatient treatment facilities for those that suffer from substance use disorder and co-occurring mental health conditions. So I've had a fair amount of experience in different parts of the industry and really have fell in love with operating recovery housing over the past couple of years. So with that, we will get started and start moving through the social model in recovery housing. So as we all know, it's important to acknowledge that we're working from the framework that addiction is a disease. Science indicates an evidence-based practice exists for the biological components. We have detox, integrated physical and behavioral health care, experts, medication-assisted treatment, and we definitely, as a recovery community, understand the biological component. The other two parts, the psychological and behavioral component, are often dealt with counseling, psychotherapy, such as CBT, to help people regulate their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. The one part that sometimes is not as identified as much is the social component of treating those with substance use disorder. And the social model of recovery deploys peer support in practicing new ways of thinking and acting to transform the culture of addiction to the culture of recovery. With that, there's been a tremendous amount of studies showing that implementing the social model of recovery in recovery housing is very advantageous. Recovery housing plays a vital role in the social and behavioral aspects of this disease. Why plan for recovery housing support or recovery support, and why doing it now? There are several reasons that the timing is right to pursue a complete range of housing opportunities for people with substance use disorders. First, we're moving from the acute care to the chronic disease management through health reform, parity, access to a full continuum of care services. We're recognizing the value of recovery support from peers, employment, and housing. Maintaining abstinence for individuals in recovery from substance abuse is a challenging task. Post-treatment relapse rates vary across studies and definitions of relapses, but often exceed 50% within 12 months of treatment. For example, a study done in 2007, approximately 65% of individuals exiting substance abuse treatment did not remain abstinent 2 years following the end of the substance abuse treatment. There was another study completed that among a sample of over 2,200 participants found a 69% relapse rate at a 1-year follow-up. In addition, surveyed studies and found relapse rates definitions ranging from no substance use up to no greater than 50% of pretreatment levels. These findings underscore the difficulty of individuals remaining abstinent following substance abuse treatment. Excuse me. A study conducted by NIDA determined that 30-day treatment centers were approximately 30 to 35% successful in treating addictions. The same study found that if a client transitioned from residential care into some form of aftercare for 6 months or more, that the success rate increased from 65 to 70%. Success was defined by 5 years of continuous recovery. Aftercare for the purposes of the study was defined as continued residential services, sober living, outpatient care, or individual therapy. As we discuss throughout the presentation, there are some challenges that the nation is facing, and public safety and public health are two big components. There is an overcrowding of jails and prisons with people with substance use disorders, the opiate crisis, and the wider recognition of harm reduction strategies, needle exchange, naloxone. There's an increased focus on home and community-based services. As we've been transitioning over the past decade, there has been a real push at preventing and ending homelessness, increased recovery and wellness through housing and stability, and increased housing stability through recovery and wellness.
So in 2011, the National Alliance for Recovery Residences was founded, and part of it is to respond to what Erin was just talking about, with the recognition that homelessness is often tied to a great deal more than a lack of adequate resources or the lack of affordable housing, and can be related to substance use disorders. And the National Alliance for Recovery Residences has recognized that, you know, since the 1800s, recovery housing has been part of the strategy to help people with substance use disorders enter and sustain their recovery, but it hasn't been largely recognized in the mainstream. And so part of the challenge is that they've been called, recovery residences have been called a lot of things, and there's not been a real common nomenclature. So you might hear everything from sober housing to sober living environments, halfway houses, reentry housing, faith-based housing, and NAR recognized the need for a unified language. The founding group recognized that using the word recovery instead of sober was incredibly important, because the focus in recovery residences is on a great deal more than just not using alcohol and other drugs. It's on learning how to move from that culture of addiction into a culture of recovery, how to build healthy relationships, how to pursue purpose through work or volunteerism or family relationships, school, those sorts of things. And so the focus on recovery is much broader than the old term of sober housing that many people have used. And the other thing that the founding members recognized was that there's many different ways that people experience recovery residences. And if you've seen one, you've seen one, and every experience may be different. But there were evidence that was available through research, through practice, that said to be a quality recovery residence, there needs to be certain standards that are met in a number of areas. So the founding members established the national standards to promote quality, and this was based on research and practice from representatives from 15 different states across the country. The regulations, the NAR certification standards, look at health and safety, zoning, enforcement of international building codes, also the supportive recovery environment that exists, the fiscal management, administration, and then the rights and opportunities for residents to voice grievances if that's necessary. So as of 2016, there are 20 state affiliate organizations of NAR, and if you're in a state and you're not sure whether or not you have one, we'd encourage you to link up through naronline.org and get connected to the folks in your state that are part of the NAR affiliate. One of the things that NAR became very clear about, and in Ohio this is something that we've focused very specifically on, is that recovery housing is housing, not treatment. And this is important for a couple of reasons. One being that it does use the social model of recovery, and that's going to be where the bulk of our presentation is today, but also that it's not a facility. It is a person's home. It's where they live, and it should feel that way. And because it's housing, it doesn't need to be regulated like a program or a service. It's already subject to significant regulations through zoning, building codes, fire and safety, and a number of regulations at the state, local, and federal level, so including Federal Fair Housing and the Americans with Disabilities Act. When you think about recovery housing, it's important to think about these three major components as what distinguishes it from other types of housing. So first of all, it is abstinence-based, and so that does mean not only is a person who's choosing to live in recovery housing focused on not using alcohol and drugs while they're living at the house, but in any part of their life they're choosing an alcohol and drug-free lifestyle. And they're also expecting to live with other people who are living an alcohol and drug-free lifestyle. So they are not just creating that environment for themselves within the house, but that support for each other throughout the community. There is also a person-driven length of stay, and so you may think of recovery housing as transitional housing, and some people think of it as a program-based kind of experience, but because it really is a person's home, it is housing where they live, and they work an individualized, a recovery plan that they create and are supported in. And as long as they are actively participating and living by the agreement, the resident agreement, and the social covenant that they signed up for, then they're able to stay in the housing. So it's just like any of us that lease on the open market. We sign a lease and we have to abide by that lease to stay. The same is true in recovery housing. People sign resident agreements and they, promise that they'll live by that, and if that's not the case, then they may need to leave. But they drive the length of stay. There's no 3-month, 6-month program experience. And then the final element is that when a person chooses recovery housing, they're looking to live in a community of recovery and supports. So they're expecting to be engaged with other people. They're looking to be in a home-like environment where people hold them accountable and where they have a responsibility to other people. So they're expecting that people are going to want to know where they're going and when they'll be home, who they're going with, who they're hanging out with. It really recreates a family-like environment where people care for one another and are connected to one another. As somebody said the other day, that accountability really, means we will be up in each other's business in a very positive way and supporting one another. And so the next thing that we'll want to talk about is, so knowing what recovery housing is and why it's recovery focused, is who really is recovery housing intended to target. And Erin's going to talk a little bit about that now.
So as we look through the being familiar with the stages of change model, depending on the stage of change that a person is, can directly correlate to the appropriate level of recovery housing that they're best suited for. A person that is highly motivated in that action stage of change may be best suited for a level 2 residence, versus a person that is struggling may be best suited for the supports of a level 3 residence. And as we go through the presentation, we'll distinguish the differences between the different levels. A lot of times with a level 3 residence, there's significantly more support, more structure, and more accountability. And as you move to the level 2 and even level 1 residence, there's not as much accountability to a staff person, more accountability to the peers that are living side by side the resident. So for lots of people that have come from a treatment framework way of thinking, sometimes the stages of change when referring to recovery housing that's a good way to look at where somebody would be best suited.
And I think the other thing that we really want to think about when we think about who recovery housing is for is, often people compare recovery housing to housing first models where they're considered zero barrier or low barrier housing, and people can continue to use and sort of be motivated towards living an alcohol and drug-free lifestyle while they're staying there. What we recognize is that that type of housing can actually present a barrier for someone who's in that preparation or action or maintenance stage of change where they're already endeavoring to live an alcohol and drug-free lifestyle. And so they want neighbors or roommates who are also making that same choice. And they want a safe, structured living environment that provides them with some of that, those boundaries for themselves. They want to be engaged in support services or treatment. They're already motivated towards that rather than needing housing first and then being motivated a little further on. Erin was referencing the different levels of recovery residences. This is some of the work that Nara did in its initial year, recognizing that when they looked across the country, there were really sort of 4 different kinds of recovery residences that existed. I'll start with level 4. It's residential treatment, and it was included in the NAR levels because there was a broad recognition that for many people in early recovery, residential treatment was their housing option. They really didn't have anywhere else to go that both met their need for safe, secure place to rest their head and also supported their need for recovery from substance use disorders. So level 4 in most states across the country are licensed or certified treatment programs. And it looks different in each state. And you'll notice that as we look at these levels. And the NAR work is, in many ways, broadly defined because each state has their own way of regulating or thinking about the different types of services, supports, and structures. And so the NAR work is really more generalized so that people can fit into it in a way that makes sense based on their state regulation. Level 3s, like Erin said, have a lot more structure to the day, to the daily schedule. There's staff supervision. There may be an outside organization that's managing the finances, the property management, and there's some staff on site as well. Often there's morning meditation. There's a meeting together at night to check in on how the day went. There's chore lists and planned responsibilities in the homes there. And there's a more maybe intentional linkage to supportive services in the community that are available to residents. Residents still participate in them voluntarily, but the structured relationships may have a different tone there than they do in level 2. Level 2, folks are usually a little further along in their recovery. There's staff, maybe a lead house manager. It might be another peer in recovery who's designated as a leader on site, and they provide some of that structure supervision. They collect the rent. They buy the toilet paper and paper towels if that's a community thing. They make sure that the chore list is complete, but they don't manage it and monitor it. So those are the kinds of things that that a level 2 would provide an experience for. And then a level 1 is peer elected. So it's a really democratically run home. So folks really are equal in their ability to impact decision-making, rule-making, structure of the residents, who lives there, who's moving out. And Oxford House is an example of a peer-elected home. So you may be familiar with that term. Sorry, the slide's not advancing. So we wanted to talk today, we were invited to talk specifically about the social model of recovery in recovery housing. And in those 4 levels that I just showed you above, you'll see that maybe supportive services and treatment are more evidence. Linkage to that is more evidence in levels 3 and 4, and closer to level 1 gets a little more focused on peers and a little less focused on staff. But it's important to know that the social model of recovery runs through all of these residences. So all of the residences should offer peer support and should offer residential stability. And we really like this quote because we think it really gets to the heart of the peer support movement and the social model of recovery, that when I is replaced with we, even illness becomes wellness. And we talk about this in other ways. Isolation and loneliness are the two most dangerous things for a person in early recovery. One of the newer ones that's out there is that the opposite of addiction is connection. And so recovery residences really do focus on the fact that we're not just about being an alcohol and drug-free environment. We're really about connecting to people who are in recovery and supportive of our recovery choices. And so as you look at some of the research and literature that's out there around the culture of addiction and the culture of recovery, we see that the social model is one of the primary practices where it's evidence to help people move between those cultures. We know that culture is largely influenced by people, places, and things, right? So where people live, their homes and neighborhoods. There's leaders in the culture of recovery. There's icons and heroes. There's music and art and language that's very specific to the culture of recovery that's different than what a person experienced when they were active in their addiction. And so it's important to help create environments that intentionally bring out the culture of recovery within the recovery residences. And William White, in his article that's cited here, really did a beautiful job describing the culture of addiction and helping us think a lot about how enmeshed a person is in addiction and what that may mean for their recovery path. And so a person who's acultural is someone who used in an individual kind of way. They maybe initiated their addiction themselves and sustained it without really connecting to a group who they were using with or actively connected to. A person who's bicultural, we all know the term like functional alcoholic, right? Someone that goes to work, parents, does all of that during the day, but then has and is seemingly having a good health and wellness experience, but they're actively using maybe with a different group of friends or a different social experience outside of those relationships. And then finally, culturally enmeshed are folks who have minimal abilities to function outside of the culture of addiction. And what we're starting to see, especially with the opiate addiction problem in Ohio, is that there are more folks who are quickly moving from that bicultural experience to the culturally enmeshed experience. And how that looks in implementing the social model of recovery or creating these recovery environments where folks are able to really enter into an environment that's safe and supportive and focused on recovery and help bring them along into the culture of recovery is significantly important. So as we look at the social model of recovery, we know that it has some other names. It was also known as the community model recovery and social community model, or just the social model. That it's not new. It dates back into the early 1900s and has really evolved in the 1940s out of the Alcoholics Anonymous 12-step programs that were established then. And one of the things that it focuses on is emphasizing the value of experience and mutual support. So by connecting with other people who have the same lived experience, people are able to provide role models for one another and to experience hope in seeing that other people are doing well. It also really focuses on the holistic and lifelong nature of recovery. So recognizing that, as Erin mentioned earlier, we're no longer in this acute care model where 30 days of treatment and you're done. Not that I think the recovery community was ever there, but the professional treatment community certainly has had moments where we've stayed stuck in that. And so how the social model complements that and builds out a continuum of care that's much more amenable to lifelong support and the person-driven process. So there are some key elements of the social model of recovery, and the social model really is the driving force. You can provide a safe structure, but if you don't have the social model of recovery active and alive within that recovery residence, the outcomes for those living there are going to be compromised for sure. So the first thing that recovery residences focus on are that experiential learning, valuing the life experience of recovering peers and the opportunity that's created for that mutual accountability. So the focus is on gaining information, not through individual counseling or through group discussions, but by learning new skills through doing things. So whether it's connecting with a peer and attending a social event in the community without using first, whether it's learning how to take care of a household, because that's not something that's happened. Like, what does clean really mean? All of these opportunities to practice these new skills are hands-on opportunities for learning rather than just something to read about or view on a film. The next is really physical space, and so I saw that Freed is on the call with us today, and he's really a leader in writing about the architectural space that's required for recovery residences. There needs to be a place for community gatherings and connections to accommodate the fact that isolation and loneliness are dangerous for people in early recovery. So it's common to see bedrooms that two people share rather than private bedrooms. It's expected to see a dining room that can accommodate all of the residents in the house to have a meal together, or a living space where folks can have time to watch a movie or have a house meeting or a morning meditation, that sort of thing. So architecturally, it's designed for people connecting to one another. And in some other types of housing, particularly when you think about the Olmstead Act and really looking at community integration, scattered site units are becoming very popular because they promote a person's opportunity to live in the community in the most integrated way. But we know that for a person with substance use disorders, regular interaction with peers is what creates the most safe space available. And having that in a single-family home or an apartment building that's integrated in the community and a residential environment is the most beneficial type of environment as well. So the intentional design of recovery residences is the ultimate goal for creating space and opportunities for connections among residences. We also know there's a continuum of recovery, so people transition from being newly in recovery to early recovery to being in long-term recovery, and that it's a process, not an event. And so recovery residences recognize that as the social models deployed within the homes and as peers connect to one another. And then finally, the social model recognizes that it's the individual recovering within a community that is important, and that community starts at home and with a connection to peers within a recovery residence, and then it extends to family and friends and social networks. So folks don't recover in isolation. And beyond that, it goes to the local community and institutions, and then to government who makes policies. So really looking at how an individual has the opportunities within the recovery residence and the broader community to find the recovery and pursue the recovery that they're planning for themselves. So now Erin's going to talk about the social model recovery scale and Dr. Kasudis' work on identifying these domains. Erin, are you with us?
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
I actually had my phone on mute while you were talking. I apologize.
No, that's fine.
Addiction treatment started to rapidly change during the 80s and 90s, and Dr. Borkman worked on social model of philosophy. Then Dr. Kasudis developed the social model philosophy scale to really assess the underlying philosophies of services provided at addiction treatment and recovery programs. And the scale then assessed to what degree did a provider or a program or a home really utilize the social model philosophy. using 13 items across 6 different domains. And these 6 different domains will go through one by one and kind of delve into them a bit more. So the physical environment. And as Laurie had discussed a little bit, to what degree does it feel like a home? Is it architecturally and functionally home-like? What part is community space? Is there a welcome mat, or is there that welcome mat feel that people get when they come home at the end of the day? Everyone in the home is able to pitch in and really act as a family. Listed here are some of the essential elements, as well as the resident really being able to make their home feel like their home, like being able to have family photos and whatnot, and personalize their space, not only their bedroom space, but also the community space in which they live in. The next area is to what degree are staff respected peers versus distant superiors. The social model programs encourage staff to mingle with participants, to be actively engaged and involved. Some of the best insight and feedback happen in an informal or community setting, sitting out on the front porch or having a meal together. The next area is that we will address is authority base. So to what degree is the authority figures of the residents based on lived experience? So oftentimes in the social model, programs encourage or employ alumni or those that are in recovery. Believing that recovery imparts experiential knowledge as an invaluable resource. Professional knowledge is not valued over experiential knowledge. There are times a person with lived experience can connect to a resident in a manner that is more impactful. The key rules don't require professional credentials. Being able to relate to a person that has never been taught how to do laundry doesn't take professional abilities. The recovery orientation is a vital component. The social model programs that have a recovery-oriented view are very successful approaches to understanding that recovery is person-driven, lifelong, and a whole person process. Plus, alcohol and drugs are only part of the problem, as most of us know. So this part of a recovery-oriented space, having the residents called residents versus clients, having recovery plans versus treatment plans, and really promoting that life skills development. The next component is the governance. So what the social model programs utilize peers to establish and enforce program rules in a significant way. Participants will feel more invested in the program and their own recovery and get to develop their own skills. Oftentimes, somebody that has been living at the home for a month can be very valuable to that person that just walked through the door because they've recently felt like the new person and have recently been able to learn how to adjust to this new living environment and can really reach that person in a way that others cannot. The community orientation is a vital component. Recovery community is invited into the home. Sometimes there are meetings held at different recovery housing homes. The residents oftentimes have a mentor or a sponsor. The residents are linked to outside services. Oftentimes they'll host recovery events. For example, sometimes they will have celebrations or retreats or meetings, like I said, at the home. The social model program recognizes that individuals must learn how to reach out and connect with a web of support in the community, including friends and employment outside of the home. Some recovery homes will, like I said, host celebration or host meetings. Also, recovery homes build a community within the home, and they will do things like carving pumpkins around Halloween, or passing out candy, or decorating cookies and handing the cookies out to their neighbors that in which the home resides. So those are just some examples to name a few.
And as we look at the literature related to recovery residences, we see that the social model of recovery is one of the most important aspects pointing to the success of the residents long term. So in studies done with 2-year follow-up among the recovery residents who were part of the study, we were able to see that for those that stayed 6 months or longer, so again, that resident-driven length of stay rather than this program cutoff, they had a more positive impact on their recovery outcomes than those who had a shorter length of stay. We also see in the literature that social supports, including those formal and informal peer supports, whether it's through a house manager that's a peer or just the connections to the other residents, and through program staff who are operating within the social model where they're not creating an us and them scenario but actively engaged in the residence itself. Those opportunities to reconnect or build new family and community networks significantly impact the recovery outcomes for residents in recovery housing. And then involvement with 12-step or other peer support programs in the recovery community are a significant predictor of positive outcomes. So as we talked about before, that individual in society aspect of the social model, it's not just the recovery community within the home, but a recognition that this is a place that a person will stay while it meets their recovery needs, and eventually they will be living somewhere else. So that connection to the broader recovery community beyond the home itself and other recovery supports or opportunities to pursue work and meaningful, healthy relationships in the broader community is a significant indicator for positive outcomes long term. And these studies showed that for those living in recovery housing compared to going back to a non-recovery supportive environment, or an environment that's not supportive of their recovery is a better way to say that, they showed much greater rates of employment. They had decreased substance use, fewer contacts with the criminal justice system or recidivism, better relationships with family, and an overall sense of wellness and improvement in their quality of life. One study explored mothers living in level 1 Oxford houses and compared them to women in a control group who returned to environments that they lived in prior to going into treatment. And over 30% of the women in the recovery housing regained custody of their children compared to only 13% of those in the control group. So we could see the impact on extended family or on family beyond the person in recovery as well. So while we've only been together for about 40 minutes, I'm sorry, I missed a slide here. Erin, go ahead. Or while we've only been together for about 40 minutes, I feel like we've indoctrinated you into the recovery housing community if you weren't here yet, so welcome. And there's some things that you can do to become more active in the recovery community, and Erin's going to talk a little bit more about one of them, and I see that it's been addressed in the chat room a little bit too.
Yes, I've been monitoring the chats and struggles that people have had with the not in my backyard and red tape through different local or county governing offices. Misinformation and misunderstanding creates fear in communities that really drive people in recovery and programs that serve them out of neighborhoods. This quote that's listed on here, I don't see anything wrong with a neighborhood association wanting to keep their neighborhood a certain way or keeping their apartment complex a certain way. These are quotes that I would say most recovery housing operators have heard at one time or another something along these lines. And this quote actually comes from the statement was made by KKK leader David Duke regarding segregation in neighborhoods. So a lot of times this is the feel that a person that is looking at opening a recovery home in a variety of in a variety of communities will actually feel. And it can be frustrating, can be discouraging, but there are fair housing laws that protect people that are in recovery because they are recognized as a class with the Americans with Disability Act. Gaining support from key community leaders, legislators, and other local stakeholders is essential when developing and operating recovery homes and housing people with substance use disorders. Good neighbor policies and community services and home upkeep help to foster positive relationships and combat discrimination. There are residents of some recovery homes that will shovel driveways of their neighbors or do spring cleaning of yard waste. So really being able to highlight those in a broader context is vitally important.
So when you think about your own communities, there are some things that you can do to help eliminate stigma. You can, if you know of recovery housing in your local community, you can support them and support the initiatives that are happening in your local communities and at your state level. Get involved with your Nara state affiliate. See how you can help disseminate fair housing resources. Connect to your legal aid organizations and let them know that you're connected with recovery housing and you can use their support when those not in my backyard issues come up. These are all things that you can plug into through the NAR network and learn more about, and we encourage you to do that. And the email address is here, and it's also in the web links as well. Some other things that we're looking at, and I've seen in some of the comments, that there just aren't policies and resources for folks who either have a substance use disorder or co-occurring disorders and really want to be in this safe living environment. And so NAR is working to advocate for resources specifically from HUD that recognize and provide subsidies for recovery housing residents. The two papers that are linked here, and they're also in the web links, are papers that point to some of the recommendations for local communities. And the one paper, the HUD policy brief on recovery housing, if you haven't looked at it, I'd urge you to do so. It actually is a policy paper put out in December of 2015, and it talks about how HUD values sober living environments, recovery living environments with peer support, and how they should be planned for in all of the local communities that have the housing and homelessness continuum of care. So there's some tremendous opportunities to build goodwill in your local communities based on some of the national leadership that's emerging from a number of organizations, including the Corporation for Supportive Housing and the National Council for Behavioral Health, in addition to the work that NAR started 5 years ago. NAR is also advocating for $2 million to be allocated to the National Institute of Health specifically to support research on recovery housing. And there's some documents here that support why that request is important. There is good research on recovery residences, but it is nowhere near the level and depth of research that's available on other types of supportive housing models. And so for us to continue to grow in best practices, and we all know that research drives policy and policy drives funding, we need these solid data collection and research experiences to move the work forward. And then finally, NAR is advocating for a Congressional Forum on Addiction and Recovery Housing in 2016. We know that there's, within the Senate, Senator Portman out of Ohio and Senator Whitehouse out of Rhode Island, along with Senator Ayotte, have hosted forums on other topics. And you can see that there's links to some of these other topics here on the site. We'd like a similar opportunity to provide education to folks on Capitol Hill about the importance of recovery residences and the difference that they can make in the quality outcomes in long-term recovery for people that we are invested in. So we invite you to help urge Congress to host one of those as well. Finally, we're open to question and answer in the last 11 minutes here, and Erin and I can be reached at these email addresses.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Erin and Laurie. Great presentation. I've seen a lot of great chats, too, going on with the participants in the chat box. We do have one question, and I think you can see that there. Laurie, do you want to address the question from
the very last one there about the 4 residents?
No. This is in, I can read it. It's,
I think that'd be helpful.
Sorry. Let's see. It's a comment, or no, maybe it's a question. Research increasingly shows that social model sober living residences operate and are seen as good neighbors. What is being done to get the word out to combat Nimby complaints? And for our participants, you most likely know what Nimby is, but I'd like to make sure we talk about acronyms. Nimby is not in my backyard. And so Laurie, what do you think about that question?
So I think from you're trying to combat Nimbyism in your community and you need access to good resources, I would encourage you to send an email to NAR at this email address here, info@naraonline.org. NAR really does have the leading experts in how federal fair housing and protects not just people in recovery from substance use disorders, but those housing, their ability to live together in recovery housing in the community of their choice. And we have folks that can offer very practical tips about approaching communities and local authorities, and also are connected to attorneys who can provide opportunities for writing letters and supporting the work that you're doing to cite and locate a recovery residence. So I would urge you to do that. NAR is also working to create some resources, some written resources and pamphlets, I know, that specifically pull together where the case law is that supports recovery housing and its ability to locate wherever it chooses to be, and to be able to share that broadly in the United States. So that's a goal. I know in Ohio we're working towards sort of like a bench sheet, a one-pager guide that people could provide with their local zoning or their city council or county commissioners to say, hey, here's the law that supports our ability to be here. Why don't you help us instead of working against us? I think one of the messages we found resonates really well in working with those folks is that we know people with substance use disorders are in all of our communities, and our friends, our neighbors, our family members, and we're bringing people in recovery in to help grow and support quality neighborhoods. So let's not be afraid of them. Let's embrace them and support them along the way.
Great points. And there's one other comment or question. Will NAR be able to help those who do not have a NAR chapter?
Yes. So often what we get is requests that there's folks in a state who are interested in organizing. I know Ohio, we just became a NAR affiliate in 2015, but we started into that work in 2013. And the support that we got from the other affiliates around the country and from the NAR board itself was tremendous in looking at what structure we wanted, how to operate, what our mission and goals would be, what kind of insurance that we needed, those sorts of things, and just technical support on how to build a network and to gain credibility. Also looking at what different states are doing. Massachusetts has a robust initiative right now. Ohio has added recovery housing to a definition in our state law. So we share all of that information very broadly and support one another in building these networks. So the first step is letting us know you're interested, and then that support will be provided along the way in the way that you need it.
That's fantastic. And so to wrap things up here, I just wanted to say that we are so grateful for the advocacy and the organization mobilizing that you folks are doing with Nara and in your states with the recovery housing councils and networks, because this is a high priority for us here at Faces and Voices of Recovery, that we ensure that people who do find recovery have a stable place to live and have access, once they have a roof over, a stable environment that they can access in employment and other needed services. So I wanted to just wrap it up here today and ask Laurie and Aaron, do you have any last-minute comment that you might have forgotten about or anything you want to emphasize before we close today?
This is Erin. The one thing that I would like to share is my own personal experience with starting from the very beginning of opening a recovery house and being a new operator. I struggled with, we ran into zoning problems with unrelated adults and what parts of town we were allowed to be in. And the reason that I became involved in all this is reaching out to NAR, and we were provided with a ton of information and really were able to educate ourselves when we went into discussions and meetings with local officials and whatnot. So I cannot say enough good things about how helpful NAR is at the national level. It made all the difference for us. So when you run into problems, they're really very helpful. And they, as Laurie said, they do have a monthly call that you can call and ask questions. And you're going to be on a call with people that have a variety of experience, people that are new, people that have a lot of experience in the field. So it's really a great organization.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and I would just add, as I looked through the chat room, there were a number of topics we didn't get to specifically. That first Friday call that Aaron's talking about, you can find the information for that on the NAR website. And the learning community, that network, that support that the recovery housing operators and the state affiliates get and give to one another is tremendous. The response is rather immediate. If you send an email, you'll get a number of folks weighing in on the question that you're asking. So I encourage you to get involved.
Fantastic. All right. Well, this has been a wonderful hour that we've spent talking about the social model of recovery housing and with our guests today, Laurie and Aaron. I'd like to ask everybody to, as we close out today, to please stay on your computer and complete the feedback survey. That would be very helpful for us. And just wanted to let you all know that in May, we have the third Thursday presentation is going to be on building a movement of moms, which is really about the parents movement, the families that are affected by addiction, and one experience of a new path in San Diego, California, and Gretchen Bergman's experience with building a movement of moms. So that will be on May 19th at 3 p.m., and we hope to see you all then. And thank you for joining us today. Have a great day. Bye-bye.